partner, and it's actually right.
Sorry.
Excellent. So the people on the recording missed the joke, but that's okay. And what Zugot describes is a period of our history when there were rabbis who were paired up and had a reputation of disagreeing, but not disagreeably, engaging in what our sages call machloket l'shem shamayim, argument for the sake of heaven. I was a student at the Ziegler School of Rabbinic Studies, and I had the privilege of being one of the Talmidim of Rabbi Elliot Dorff, the rector of what was then University of Judaism and now American Jewish University. He would go on to become the chair of the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards. And Elliot is a mensch of a human being. He's a brilliant legal scholar and Talmudist from whom I learned a lot. But I started to get to know through his writing another rabbi, and I didn't really know anything about him at the time, but there were various occasions, especially when it came to bioethics, where Rabbi Dorff was disagreeing with a ben zug of his, with somebody who seemed to be his frenemy, his adversary, who challenged him to think deeply about issues of medical ethics, and who I assume was also challenged by him. That rabbi was Rabbi Avram Reisner. And it was a really interesting time when we were grappling with, I think it was the Terry Schiavo case, and sort of thinking about medical intervention. And I remember reading Rabbi Reisner's responsum and thinking about the dialectic between these two rabbis and how it was just such a wonderful example of how our conservative movement and how modern Judaism offers us a glimpse into the unfolding history of our tradition. Then I came to Baltimore and was delighted to learn that Avram is a wonderful human being, who's a terrific rabbi in his own right, and not a one-trick pony. He has much to offer, but I'm not going to waste more of your time. I'm going to ask Melissa to come up and tell you a little bit about our esteemed guest who's speaking today in this third of our Locks and Learn series. Please, Melissa.
All right. Not a one-trick pony. Good morning, everybody. Just a quick introduction. Rabbi Reisner is Rabbi Emeritus at Congregation Chevrei Tzedek in Baltimore and a member of longstanding on the Conservative Movement's Committee of Jewish Law and Standards, the central authority on Halakhah, where he sits on the subcommittee on biomedical ethics. He is currently associated with the Magen Tzedek Project of the Rabbinical Assembly.
Yeah, that's not true.
Okay, skip that last part.
Exactly, it's a great thing.
Skip that last part. Please help me give a warm welcome on a cold morning to Rabbi Avram. Come on up, thank
you. Thank you, Melissa. Thank you, Daniel. Yes, the law committee is where Elliot, who's chair, and I, who have been on the committee for a very long time. And the committee is a committee of rotating seats, but they put
a little bit here. No, you're good.
They put back a couple of people every year, and Elliot and I are the long-serving members of the committee. And yes, we have been on the same side of some things, but subject of a different talk, one could try to analyze the frame of mind of Rabbi Dorff and of Rabbi Reisner and how they differ. And we did actually in medical ethics do exactly that. We had competing approaches to end-of-life care and ended up writing a what's called a medical decision memo, in which said the conservative movement believes in, if you hold by Rabbi Dorff, X, if you hold by Rabbi Reisner, Y. The whole document went that. So yeah. Anyway, I am here to talk about continuity and change in Halakhah. And Halakhah on its face, wants to be a very small c conservative doctrine. Why? Because we say that God gave the Torah at Sinai, and He instructed us what it is we're supposed to do. And in fact, if you read the Torah's chock full of these are the statutes, observe my statutes. Here's what they are. If you have a Jewish slave, that's where these are my laws starts. Then you can have them only for 6 years, and you have to free them. There are a series of very established rules, including, the Shabbat and Kashrut, and all these things are written specifically in the Torah. And if our theory is that all of Jewish law derives from our interpretation of what it is that God told us to do, and I think that fairly well describes what the sages were trying to do. God gave us instructions. We are trying to do those instructions. Like any limited book of instructions, it doesn't cover every particular case. So when a case comes up that's not covered by what's specifically in the text, I need to try to, psych out with the text. I have to understand what it is that God would want in this case. And I do that by midrash, by reading biblical verses. So that has to be a very cautious, I'm trying to do exactly what God wanted. I'm trying to do that today. I was trying to do that yesterday. My grandchildren are going to try to do that years from now. It's all this one consistent thing. So in fact, if you look at our source sheets, you have a number of verses in the Bible that essentially make that point. You shall not add anything to what I command you or take anything away from it. This is number one. Be careful to observe only that which I enjoin upon you, neither add to it nor take away from it. We are, by its nature, tied to a text and a law, Halakhah. So, in theory, this is almost, this is originalism in the rabbinic form, right? And then you have the third verse here, the mitzvah known as lo tasur. You shall act in accordance with what they shall tell you, they being the court. It was the priests at the time of Deuteronomy, but the rabbis, when they became the controlling forces in the law courts in the Second Temple period, accepted these as describing them. Act in accordance with what they tell you, observe scrupulously all their instructions. You shall act in accordance with the instructions they give you. You must not deviate from that which they tell you, neither to the right nor to the left. So, the sages have read these verses and said they apply to us. It is the Torah's law and our interpretation of the law, which is the law. And you may not deviate. It becomes even deeper than that, where a question comes up. This is now number 2. It is said about the 2 days of Yom Tov that are observed in the diaspora. You all know it's 1 day of Yom Tov in Israel becomes 2 abroad. Rabbi Zera said, today we know the calculation of the calendar, yet we observe 2 days. It's not clear to me whether that was a statement or a question by Rabbi Zera. And Abaye said to him, well, we learned at first, they would light bonfires to notify those distant from Jerusalem when the new month had been declared, right? Court declared the new month, you gotta let people know, because especially Rosh Hashanah, but even other holidays are coming up, like Pesach, 2 weeks. So you go up on the hills, you light bonfires, and there's a chain, and that lets people know. That's what they would do at first. When the Kutim confused matters, don't want to talk about who the Kutim were, there were people lighting fraudulent bonfires in order to mess up the calendar and the temple's calculation.
Trolls.
Trolls, yes. So they enacted that runners should go out, and wherever the runners arrived, they observed one day, and where they didn't reach, you would observe 2 days because of uncertainty as to which was the proper date. That's the source of 2 days of the holiday abroad. But if the Kutim ceased, this is what the source that Abaye quotes is, if the Kutim ceased, we would again observe only 1 day. So maybe there's a reason to do 1 day. Gemara continues. So today, when we know the calculation of the calendar, why do we observe 2 days? Well, apparently, in the early days, the community in Babylonia was still dependent on the Supreme Court in Israel. So they wrote a letter to Israel and said, what should we be doing? And they got a response. They sent a letter from the court in Israel, be scrupulous concerning your father's customs with which you are entrusted. You have been observing 2 days. That was your father's custom. Continue to observe 2 days. Why? It may happen that persecution will be declared and confusion will follow. You can't really trust that because right now things are good, therefore you will always have it right. Maintain your father's custom. So now, on top of the continuity of the law as interpreted by the court has said even custom, even things which have changed and we know it, you should continue to do the way it has always been done. Continuity in Jewish law. The problem with continuity in law is that it just can't respond to all situations. So the rabbis subtly undercut the continuity picture, but understand that while they undercut it, there is this overarching drive to maintain what has been. Now we move to change, right? So how did they undercut it? The first is what I call takana, or enactment. There are some things that the rabbis did as straight out, this is what I'm telling you to do. It's not precedented, it's not an interpretation, it's just something new. So we have that represented in the Talmud as well. Rabbi Bar Ashi, this is change 1, said in the name of Rav, one who lights a Hanukkah candle must say a blessing. Okay, Hanukkah candle, Hanukkah holiday. Problem with that in terms of the not changing what the Bible says? Anybody?
It's not in the Bible.
It's not in the Bible. It happened many centuries later, right? It can't be in the Bible by definition. What blessing does he say? Well, he says the blessing, you all know the blessing for the Hanukkah candles. He sanctified us with his commandments, commanding us to light the Hanukkah candle. Oh, God commanded us to light the Hanukkah candle? Where did he command us? This is the Talmud. expressly, sort of struggling with this, what's going on here. Rav Ivya said, it is from you must not deviate. That's the verse that we had at the top of continuity. They are claiming change from the very source of Halakhah continuity because of that sense of, go to the court and they'll tell you what to do. So you may not deviate from God's instructions in the Torah, nor may you deviate from what the rabbis instruct you, and this is what they're instructing you. Why can you say he commanded us, God commanded us to light Hanukkah candles? Because he set up the structure. He commanded us, literally the verse, to listen to the sages. The sages say that's what you should do. So you should do it because God approves. And Rabbi Nehemiah used a different verse. Ask your elders and they will tell you. Same idea, they're just arguing about which verse is the appropriate one to use. All right, so now the rabbis have got a little bit of room to make an enactment in order to respond to whatever's happening in the world that the Torah didn't anticipate and they have to respond to. First, a little bit of wiggle room. The second is exigent circumstance. Again, these are all, I'm just giving you, I'm a text teacher, that's what I do, right? I'm just giving you the source material out of which this develops. Rabbah said, may the Beit Din make an enactment that overrides a matter of the Torah. That's a really stunning idea. If God gave us the Torah and he said, you may not deviate, but then he said, listen to the rabbis, well, what gives, right, when you're looking at both problems? Come and hear. He cites the source. When Adonai your God appoints a prophet from among your brethren, you shall heed him. Now, there's another Torah verse saying you gotta listen, this time is to a prophet. Rabbis have claimed they're like priests. They're gonna claim now they're like the prophets too. Even if he tells you to transgress one of the commandments of the Torah, like Elijah did on Mount Carmel. Elijah on Mount Carmel, I'm not sure, who's on top of the story, but he was fighting idolatry, and he set up an altar on Mount Carmel. That's a problem because you're only supposed to have an altar at the temple. He set up an altar on Mount Carmel, and he had a challenge with the idolatrous priests whose sacrifice would be struck by lightning and set on fire. And of course, he won, they lost. That's what Elijah did on Mount Carmel. But that's transgressing the clear biblical indication that you can't have an altar outside of the temple. And he did. How did he do that? In the moment, you should heed him. He understood that he can do that, and in the moment, you should heed him. That's in order to protect matters. That's an exception. That is to say, in exigent circumstances, in Sha'at HaChak, you can do what you need to do. Now, most people, not everyone, thinks that this exigent circumstances exception is time limited. So it naturally sunsets when the exigent circumstance ceases to be. Oh, well, this wasn't immediately a problem. COVID congregations aren't meeting. They want to meet by electronic, Zoom-like things, may they do that. I wrote a response, I don't know, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, saying that you can use Zoom-like electronic media to join a minion, but there has to be a physical minion to join. You can't constitute a minion on electronic media. But now, in COVID, there were congregations that wanted to not get together at all, anybody. They want to constitute their minion. Can you do that? The regnant responsum at the Conservative Movements Law Committee was mine, which said, no, you can't. Along came the Law Committee and said, exigent circumstances, you can now. Great determination, everybody applied it. A couple of years down the road, the question becomes, when did the exigent circumstances end? And does this ruling need to end? And now the Law Committee sort of fell apart in its opinions. There were some conservatives like me who said, yes, exigent circumstances, limited time. For COVID, I, who wrote the response that says you can't create a minion, on electronic media, say you can now. And I also say that when it's time, you have to stop. And other members of the committee said, no, we like this, you can, it's fine. And it remains a split opinion. I have no idea what you guys do. So I'm not, commenting about that.
So it's great, and I read your tshuva and looked at the Halakhah opinion at the time, and what we ended up doing was, we didn't say Baruch Hu. The only thing we did that was requiring of a minyan with the tefillah was Kaddish, was Morris Kaddish. That was the thing, so we weren't reading Torah with brachot, but in order for people to say Kaddish, we were doing that even if there wasn't a physical minyan. And yes, we have basically moved away from that. I think it happened by circumstance because we had a minyan. But in this moment, I wouldn't say Kaddish if we had 9 people on a Zoom and 1 person or 3 people in the room here. So.
Okay, relatively conservative holidays. There's someone else
In this area.
who decide, but look at that, right? The Talmud anticipated the possibility that you're going to have to do something that's unusual in unusual circumstances, and you have to have the flexibility to do that. So they established a principle, a precedent of how you do change in a system that wants the law to be forever, right? This is still going on. Another example of that exigent circumstances thing is number 3 here, and I didn't have a text to give you, so I quoted from an outsider. The question in Israel, at the very beginning, before the state, was when the Shemitah year, the 7th year when the land is supposed to lie fallow, when it came around, that was going to be a huge hit to the Israel economy. And so there had been devised, actually, long before then, an out, sort of like the sale of chametz. What do you do if you have this chametz and you can't get rid of it without taking an enormous hit economically, especially a store owner, or, imagine you own a liquor shop, right? Right? So the exception that was made was the sale of chametz, where you can do this semi-fictitious sale so that your chametz belongs to a non-Jew and not to you, and then take it back after Pesach and everything will be hunky-dory. Okay. Well, the suggestion here was that the Shemitah problem should be solved the same way. Sell the land to a non-Jew, you, the Israeli farmer, can continue to do the work and raise the stuff, but it belongs to the non-Jew, so it's not a debt of Shemitah. There was an enormous fight over whether you should be able to do this or not. And so the description here is the thinking that Rabbi Kook, who was then the chief rabbi of Yafo, outside of Tel Aviv, but Tel Aviv was only just beginning to exist, right? He permitted the sale, and he said that residence in the land of Israel is a biblical mitzvah, so it is, quote, obligatory to permit the annulment of the sabbatical prohibitions through sale. It's obligatory to do what is, in theory, forbidden, because that's what's necessary for residents of the land of Israel. Enormously radical argument. I am not sure what I would say about it if I were involved in the argument. But he's a hero of the state of Israel because he allowed the Israel economy to continue. Exigent circumstances, what the Torah says don't do, I say you have to do. And then that notion that we have the power to play with the law if we need to gets expanded. Number 4 is what I call sufficient reason. The Torah says the matter shall be determined by 2 witnesses. I skipped a line here that I should have. The sages allowed a single witness in a case of a woman concerning the death of her husband. If there was only a single witness that her husband died, she shouldn't be left in Agunah, unable to remarry, because there wasn't a second witness. So we will accept one witness concerning the death of a husband. Oh, wait a minute, but the Torah says only 2. Tosfot, this is a commentary to the Talmud. It appears to Rabbeinu Yitzchak that it is by a rabbinic enactment that one witness was accepted in this case. We actually don't have record of such an enactment. We just know that they came to accept one witness in cases of protecting a woman from becoming an unmarriageable woman. So we know factually that change happened. We don't know how it happened. Rabbeinu Yitzchak says, well, it must have been a rabbinic enactment. And this is Rabbeinu Yitzchak's right, this is not to be considered overriding a matter in the Torah. Oh no, didn't it just override a matter in the Torah? Right? No, it's not to be considered overriding a matter in the Torah, because it seems reasonable to believe this, and in matters where there is some reason and support that is not considered overriding a matter in the Torah. Oh, well, this is a whole lot different from exigent circumstances.
Yeah.
Right? If there's some reason, I am going to be very conservative. I want to do what has always been done. Minhag avotecha v'yadecha. The custom of your parents is one you should continue. That's what the court ruled, right? I want to continue to do things. But if you give me a sufficient reason, well, then I will take that into consideration. Number 5, changing time. These are all various forms of the same problem. How do I take the conservative law, the undeviating law, and stretch it in such a way that it can meet the needs of the times? And this, Rabbi Kratch Oh, I had just finished preparing this when Rabbi Drash gave a Torah to the Board of Rabbis on Hanukkah, or close to. And that was this text, and I already had it in my thing, and I struggled, should I get rid of it, or should I not? I decided to keep it in. I told him that I was going to do that. The law, and now we're into the law codes. If there are two doors on different sides of a house, one must light at both, so passers-by will not think there's no light here, he must not have lit at the other door either. The author of Truma wrote, for us who light inside, one light is sufficient. You no longer have to light two, for no one will notice but the residents. But, right, so it seems to me in theory, this is the conservative Holocaust record. In theory, it seems to me that now that we're lighting inside, this problem, you have to light on both doors, so a passersby not have an incorrect assumption, doesn't really apply. So we should be able to stop lighting at both doors, but it's inappropriate to be lenient. Yeah, you gave me some reason, but I'm not ready to do it. That's the author of Truma. And Moses Isserles takes it the other way. Some light inside because there are thieves. Rabbi Drach talked about the concern about anti-Semitism, and right? Isserles doesn't couch it in those terms. I think he might be, glossing a little bit what the real problem was. Some light inside because there are thieves, and likewise, they do not put a mezuzah on the outer door because they will take it. Now, a long time ago in Columbia, we had an incident where the mezuzot of all of the students on a couple of floors in my dorm were torn down and tossed down the stairwell. So maybe you don't want to put a mezuzah out because you get defaced, right? So some light inside because there are thieves. Likewise, they do not put a mezuzah on the outer door. This is incredible because if anything is a biblical based, I mean, this is Shema, right? But they're still not going to do it because of the thieves. It seems that this is also the reason we're not careful about lighting next to the door. But what does it matter if it is near the door or far from it, since it's not intended to be a symbol for other than for the people inside? So it seems to me. So what the Truma said is inappropriate to be lenient. Isserles says, yeah, it seems to me that makes sense. Some reason, right? The law can change, our customs can change when the circumstances are appropriate. This is an item that appears in the law in all sorts of ways. Talmud rules that you can't drink from water that has not been covered. And it explains that that's because a snake might have injected poison into the water, and it's dangerous. So with modern sanitation, it was very quickly ruled that that no longer applies. Because it no longer applies. That seems like a reasonable, sufficient reason. This is a cute one. The Talmud gives three reasons, or three affirmative actions that are required to a mourner. They are to tear kriya, to rip actually your clothes in the Talmud's time, a ribbon today, to overturn his bed and to wrap his hair, and also several prohibitions. And we do only one We do all of the prohibitions. We don't do all the things that are prohibited, but we do only one of the, there are only three things you have to do as a mourner. We do only one. And so we have a commentary. A mourner is required to flip over his bed. I have found that today we're not required to do this because we have servants among us and they will think it's sorcery. Oh. A mourner is required to wrap his head, but many do not behave this way because the Gentiles, even those in our own house, make fun of them and they're looked at askance.
Is that a good reason to do not?
Sufficient reason. But socially, it might actually have been a sufficient reason. Jews in Ashkenaz, this comes from Franco-Germany, were a small population, pretty insecure in their lives there. They might not have felt comfortable doing things that are looked at as outrageous. I mean, there's a limited amount of tolerance for our religion here. Maybe I don't want to do this. So much so that we don't do these things. I mean, it's a dead letter. You read the Talmud, it's there. But there is no community that I know of. Well, actually, in the Sephardic community, in some of the Islamic countries, they were still doing head wrapping. What that meant is you see it with the talus. Sometimes you put it over your head and you wrap it around your face, so it's just your nose out, the bottom of your face is covered. That's the wrap that they're talking about. And a mourner would do that for the week of Shiva. They'd wear a headscarf. Well, we don't do that. But I'm just saying, some Islamic countries, the Jewish community was still doing that until fairly recently. Yes?
Was there an explanation for why those were required during mourning?
The Talmud has an explanation, but doesn't tell you much. They're interpreting verses in Ezekiel in which he is told to mourn. And the language of the instruction is interpreted by the Talmud to be these practices. Having said that, I'm not the sociologist who could tell you why the rabbis thought these were appropriate things to read into Ezekiel. Somebody would opine about that, but I'm not the one.
I think the reason that was because there were things on top that the person who died had.
Well, so overturning the bed, I think I understand. It's just a matter of no shoes and that sort of thing, sitting on a lower chair. You didn't want to appear to be living in comfort or luxury. So instead of, think of our beds. I'm not sure what their bed in Talmud's time was, but it's raised on legs. It's got a comfortable mattress. If you turn it over, the mattress is now on the ground, and you're not sleeping on the super comfortable mattress. I tell you that as just my way of having imagined what they're talking about. I'm really not sure. I haven't done a lot of extra thinking about this. But yeah, okay. It makes a certain amount of sense. Number 7, best judgment. Rava said to his students, Papa and Huna, should a legal ruling of mine come before you and you discern in it a flaw, do not tear it up until you have come before me. If I have a reason, I'll explain it to you. And if not, I'll retract it. After I die, do not tear it up, but do not follow it. Do not tear it up. Were I there, I might have explained my reasoning. But do not follow it. A judge has only his own judgment, literally what his eyes see. So you, as a judge, have to act according to your best judgment. Now, that's your best judgment of the sources, the precedents, but also your best judgment of exigent circumstances and changing times, as we talked about, right? You never should accept a ruling on authority, which ruling you cannot justify to yourself. Joel Roth wrote a book. You know the name of Joel Roth? He was still alive, but he was a giant of the law committee of the conservative movement's Jewish law. Wrote a whole book about the ways of Jewish law, and he concluded that this sentence, a judge has only his own judgment, is the heart of Jewish law. Again, don't know that I completely agree with him, but
God was sort of incidental in that book.
yeah, right. But he was getting at something about how this works. If you can never rule in a way that you don't find you're able to justify, well, that has implications. What's the story in terms of time?
We have about 12 more minutes.
Correct.
Uh-huh.
And should I be wrapping up now, or can I?
Well,
take
I
longer?
mean, if people have questions, someone asked questions as you were going, we usually have questions at the end, but
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, so I'm going to push it and try to run through these last couple of things. Number 8, Hayashar v'hatov. That means that was straight and that was good. Here's a really exciting Talmud passage. A paid guardian, this is the rule, if he breaks an item in his care, even if he was not negligent, he must pay. Okay, that's the rule, a paid guardian. Porters, so here, the story comes sort of in the wake of the law, right? Well, there were these porters, paid guardians, who broke wine casks of Rabbi Bar Hanan. He confiscated their cloaks. And the Talmud is playing on a biblical thing about if you've taken a cloak, you have to keep, since the person who owes you money, the Bible's loan, might need the cloak, you have to give it back by the end of the day. He confiscated their cloaks. They brought the matter before Rav. They took it to court. He said, give them their cloaks. Rabbi Bar Hanan says, is that the law? Do I really have to give them their cloaks? And Rav cited Proverbs, yes, so that you walk in the path of the good. So Rabbi Bar Hanan returned their cloaks, because that was the judgment of the court. The porters then said to Rav, we are poor, we have worked all day, are hungry, and we have nothing. And Rav said to Rabbi Bar Hanan, pay them their wages. They broke my stuff. I'm trying to get paid. The law is that I'm supposed to get paid. And you're telling me no, I should pay them? Is that the law? Said Rabbi Bar Hanan. One of the sages. He knows some things about the law. Rav says, yes, end of the verse, observe the ways of the righteous. The right thing to do might be a reason to override the stated law. That's the point of the story. Personal story. I didn't know this until I quoted this to a cousin of mine. Many, many years ago, almost 100 years ago in Toronto, my great-grandfather, mother's side, was one of the 2 leading rabbis in Toronto. my mother's brother, my uncle, his father-in-law was a young, up-and-coming merchant in town. Guy came to town, took a loan from a big merchant, and had my cousin's father-in-law sign a guarantee. Then he skipped town. So they came to court in front of my great-grandfather, who was the chief rabbi of the court. They were unrelated at that point. My uncle hadn't married his daughter yet. And the court ruled, well, you guaranteed the loan, you're going to have to pay. Okay, fine, left. Month later, first payment is due, an installment plan works out. The merchant refused to accept the money from my cousin's father-in-law. So why are you, the rabbi ruled that I have to pay you. He says, yeah. The rabbi ruled that I have to pay you, but he asked me to stay after court. And he said, the rule is that he has to pay you, but you're a rich merchant, and he's got, he doesn't have two pennies to rub against each other, or whatever that expression is. Don't take the money. So that's what the rabbi ruled. That's this story. I didn't know anything about this. It's in the history of another piece of my family, but there it was. Okay, so how do you deal with all of this? You deal with all of this by trying to weigh carefully the desire to be consistent with Jewish tradition and whether you understand there is a reason, a need to make a change, and then as carefully, cautiously as you can. So the last thing here, number 9, is responsum by Ellie Spitz about mamzerut. You know what mamzerut is, I think. These are children born out of, well, not out of wedlock, but of a forbidden union, who therefore are not allowed to marry. And it's a huge problem because it seems so unfair to apply to these children something that was the sin of their parents. Spitz determined that we in the conservative movement will not receive testimony of the state of mamzerut. If you come and tell me the guy wants to get married, and someone says, he's the child of an extramarital affair, he's a mamzer, you, the rabbi, say, I don't know that, and I don't want to know that. Yes. So, but what's interesting is how Rabbi Spitz wrote about this. There are grounds for uprooting the laws of mamzerut. Okay, we talked about the possibility that you can uproot a law of Torah. But there is a narrower category of halakhic change that's better suited. I, recognizing that I could just throw this out, do not want to just throw out a biblical law. So I'm going to try to tailor a solution that is on, the Supreme Court does this all the time, right? You look for the minimal legal ground. It's wise to operate in a halakhic realm in a way that meets our objectives and causes the least challenge to the larger system. This category of halakhic change, the barring of a law through a procedural mechanism, has a history, and he talks about its history. By refusing to entertain the evidence I said for the last paragraph, a choice that is our judicial prerogative, We have created an impediment to holding that a person is a mamzer. I will not hear anything that you say. And that doesn't require that I get rid of the category of mamzer. Oh yes, if I knew for sure that the person was mamzer, I can do that. Personal, prerogative. If there was a person who came to me looking for marriage, and I knew the circumstances of their birth, and I knew they were a mamzer, so I couldn't just close my ears because I know they're a mamzer. I told them, go daddy will marry. Not because daddy is more liberal than I am, Halakhah, but because he doesn't have the information. This is the ruling, right? We won't take evidence of mamzerut. We're not throwing out the category of mamzerut. So I won't do the marriage because I know you're a mamzer, right? Other rabbis don't know that. So you look at the designations of movements. There's the Orthodox. Orthodox means conforming to the established standards of behavior. They are trying very hard to be on the continuity side. They don't do it perfectly, but that's what they think of themselves. There are the conservatives. Conservative is what it means. We try hard to do the halakhah. We are open to the fact that it may need to be handled differently than before. And there's the reform who say, you've given me all these, this running room, let me do what I want. Best judgment of the judge. They're all within the bounds of the system. It all depends just what place you take. And I'm going to end with a text that you don't have. An Orthodox rabbi wrote a book on Halakhah, a liberal Orthodox rabbi, and he coined a term called flexigidity. That describes the Halakhah. Flexigidity. And he quotes the Sephardic chief rabbi of Tel Aviv, a fellow by the name of Chaim David Halevi. And this is his text. And listen to just how intellectually confused, in a sense, this is, and how it makes perfect sense given what I just told you. He writes, in my humble opinion, the whole truth is that we are not allowed to budge 1 inch from the halakhah. However, I do not agree that halachic innovations made in complete loyalty to the halakhah should be considered deviated, even if these innovations changed the actual ruling from what was traditionally been practiced in the past. Anyone who thinks that the halakhah is frozen and that it cannot be adjusted to the right or the left is very mistaken. On the contrary, there is nothing as flexible as the halakhah. It's only by the merit of the halakhah's flexibility that the Jewish people was able to continue walking in the path of the Torah. If the rabbis of our generation have the courage to introduce halakhic innovations according to the truth of the Torah, in absolute loyalty to the halakha would be different, in absolute loyalty to the halakha, then the halakha will continue to be the path of the Jewish people until the end of time.
Right.
Thank you. We are right at 9 o'clock, but we'll take like 5 minutes for questions if people have questions, and then you can stay after. I have to go to work, but anyone have a question?
Sorry, take others.
No, go ahead.
I'm just curious about the not the exigent, the sufficient reason text that you brought, that category. It was interesting. I wonder if that category for you is necessarily bound up with ethics. In other words, when you say sufficient reason, are there
are the parameters to that? Just because I think I have, is it Trump saying, I'm just following morality of my own mind, wherever that might lead us? Or is there certain agreed upon standards, norms in society? We say a sufficient reason is where we might, generally agree that the law is not meeting, it's not connecting up with the God who actually cares about human beings and their pain and their struggle.
Yeah, so my answer to that is no, there are not agreed upon standards for that. That takes us to the best judgment of the rabbi. In some areas, that we're going to get different responses from different authorities, and you shop jurisdictions, which again, all of this is true of American law as well, right? The thing about the sufficient reason is it's vague enough to allow anything that you think is important. Yeah.
Very interesting, thank you. Enjoyable. Coming from the view, asking a question that occurs perhaps because I was recently a Synagogue president, not conservative, whatever, and thinking about what you just kind of mentioned in passing, that the rabbis claim the authority of the court. That little bit there. So and I have no idea, and it's not to make fun of a very serious, but if the Jackson, Mississippi thing where the synagogue has been destroyed, I don't know what their affiliation is, I assume they have a rabbi.
Okay.
If there's a disagreement between the board and the rabbi as to whether we need to immediately find some place to be, or Zoom is the answer for a while, is it up to the board or is it up to the rabbi?
Well, the two answers to that question. As a matter of Halakhah, it is up to the rabbi and not the board.
As the rabbis define.
Because the rabbi is what is called a Mara Da'akra. He is the master of this place. He determines how Halakhah has to be applied in this place. And we apply that to congregations. It used to be towns, but this country is all mixed up with, right? So we apply it to congregations. But having said that, in fact, it's the board, because the board, we are also congregationalists and not diocesan. That is to say, every congregation hires and fires its clergy. So guess what? Who's got the power, right?
So it says in our contracts that we are Mara Da'akra. So if the board were to remove us or make a halachic decision they don't like, there also could be a legal action.
Correct, and
Wow.
that's sort of like the flexigidity problem, right? Yeah.
One more, and we have to.
Just how do rabbis distinguish between the different categories? Because it seems to me that the changing times, the Hanukkah candles and also the mourners, those are very specific to the time, but maybe the exigent circumstances, that if you're in a place where there's not anti-Semitism, where you're not scared, you don't need to do that, and that you should go back. But how do they decide, no, this is just the way it is now versus this is for a limited amount of time?
Again, this is the judgment call. The categories are terms, but the specific cases that I brought within each category are themselves subject to my interpretation. They're just, these categories bleed into each other.
Go for it, yes.
Yeah.
So, great talk, by the way, thank you. So you made a lot of analogies, and I think many people have with the U.S. Constitution. But the Constitution does have one thing that we don't have for Hurrah, which is the amendments, right? Slavery is written in the Constitution, it's not there now. I just wonder your thoughts on, there are just some things that are written down that are very hard for people. I think of the issues of sexual equality, LGBT, and things that are written that are actually, that if you read them in the Torah, are actually hard for people that have to live that. I wonder if you have any thoughts on that.
I do, but really do not have the time to do that. Rabbi Spitz's responsum, I think, was the model for me to try to find ways that are less extreme than just rejecting the Torah. I'll give you an example from my own legislative history. The question was how the movement deals with homosexuals, and I was part of the responsum which ruled that we can limit the prohibition that is in Leviticus about homosexuality to anal sex, and all other relationships, marriage, right, everything else, what is done in the privacy of the bedroom, other than anal sex, is not subject to the prohibition on homosexuality. There is one limited prohibition. So I take the category of prohibition and narrow it as narrowly as possible, but don't overturn it. One of my colleagues on the committee said, oh, come on, we conservative movements don't believe God gave us the Torah, just throw it out.
And there was another opinion that didn't pass that in some ways I would say has become also, very resonant for a lot of people, understanding it in conversation with the ones that you did. And as I say, one, I just want to say thank you for being here. This was really an extraordinary survey of our tradition, and also, there are some mechanisms, as Rabbi Reisner said, sometimes even in antiquity, we were creating amendments of a sort, like this takanot that he was saying, and there are even some examples here in the source sheet.
Yeah.
So that is something that's available to us, and there are rabbis who are more or less inclined to use them in certain circumstances. I think it was one of my takeaways from this really extraordinary presentation. Thank you.
Yeah, but who cares if you're gay? You're not going to care what the Torah says.
We can continue that conversation in 1 second, right now. Thank you so much. Thank you. Please help me thank Rabbi Reisner. And just to remind you, because a lot of you have been regulars, next week is Saul Davis, who is the CEO or the executive director at the Jewish Museum, who's going to talk about how that place has completely changed. I don't know if you've been there recently, but talk about maintaining history and bringing it into the current. And then we skip a week. So February 4th, there is, because of scheduling, there will not be a Lots and Learn, but the next Wednesday, February 11th, is our last one for the series. And that is Amit Peleg, who is an Israeli cellist who's going to talk about this amazing project he has called the Music House, which uses classical music to bring contemporary audiences together and get kids interested in. So thank you all for coming. Please grab some food on the way out. And thank you, Rabbi Reisner.
Yes,